The boarding gate at Phoenix Sky Harbor buzzed with the usual orchestra of travel, wheels of carry-ons clicking against tile, the muffled voice of an agent over the intercom, and the low hum of impatient sighs. Amid the crowd, waited quietly, a soft-spoken woman in her mid-30s with sand-colored hair tied back in a neat ponytail. She stood apart, hands tucked into the pockets of her worn jacket, her posture giving away the discipline of someone who'd once lived by strict rules, though most people wouldn't have noticed. Her boarding pass read 14B, a middle seat, typical. She'd smiled politely when the airline clerk apologized, saying the flight was full. "It's fine," she'd said. It was always fine. Wasn't the type to complain or draw attention to herself. Not anymore. When the call to board echoed through the gate, she moved with the others, unhurried, invisible. She found her seat halfway down the aisle, tucked between a teenage boy glued to his phone and a middle-aged woman scrolling through travel photos. Placed her small duffel beneath the seat, adjusted her, and stared out the window. The desert stretched endlessly below, glowing gold in the late afternoon sun. From the outside, she looked like any ordinary passenger, calm, composed, maybe a little tired. But beneath that quiet surface, something heavier lived. It had been nearly 5 years since she'd left the Army, since she'd walked away from the cockpit of an A-64 Apache, the helicopter she used to call home. 5 years since she'd felt the vibration of rotor blades under her boots, or the burn of sand against her cheeks in the Afghan wind. In the service, she had been captain, one of the few female pilots in her division, a voice of steady command during chaos. But out here on a crowded commercial flight, she was just seat 14B, window view. She hadn't planned on flying again, not even as a passenger, but life had its ways of forcing returns. A job opportunity in Denver, civilian, stable, normal, had tempted her to face her old ghost, the sky. As the engines roared to life, gripped the armrest without realizing it. The familiar hum of turbines vibrated through her bones. For a fleeting second, she wasn't in an airliner. She was back in the desert, strapped into her Apache, the horizon shimmering with heat and the radio alive with static. "This is Falcon 1, visual on target." Her eyes blinked open, reality snapping back. The teenage boy beside her was laughing at something on his screen, and the woman on the aisle was tapping through selfies. Exhaled slowly, unclenching her fist. The ghost of that old voice faded, leaving only the dull buzz of the cabin. She turned her gaze to the window again. The plane rolled down the runway, engines howling louder. As they lifted into the blue, she pressed a palm to the glass, watching the city fall away. A strange mix of awe and dread filled her, the same feeling she'd had on her first solo flight years ago. She reached into her jacket and touched something cold and metallic, a small dog tag on a thin chain. Her own name, etched in fading letters, caught the cabin light. She still carried it everywhere, though she never wore it. It was less a memory than a reminder of what she'd done, what she'd lost, and the version of herself that had burned out somewhere between duty and exhaustion. The light blinked off. The boy asked for a Coke, the woman ordered coffee, smiled politely when the attendant offered snacks. "Just water," she murmured. She tried to focus on her book, a well-worn paperback about climbing mountains, of all things, but the words blurred. Her mind drifted instead to the hum of the engines, the rhythmic sway of the plane, the endless clouds beyond. There was something both terrifying and comforting about being suspended between worlds, no longer on the ground, not yet at the destination. And yet, part of her wondered if she belonged anywhere at all. Somewhere a child laughed, a man coughed, life went on, but inside the silence was immense. She hadn't told anyone on this flight who she really was, not that it mattered. To them she was just a quiet woman traveling alone, a faint smile, a reserved nod. As the plane leveled off above the desert, the sunlight turned everything gold, the wings, the clouds, even the reflection on her window. Tilted her head and thought, maybe this flight will finally be the start of something new. She didn't know it yet, but fate had already boarded this plane with her. Somewhere ahead, hidden in the hum of the engines, destiny was waiting, and soon, the shy passenger in 14B would have no choice but to answer when the sky came calling once more. The plane had been in the air for just under 30 minutes, slicing smoothly through calm skies. The sign blinked off with a soft chime, and a murmur of relief rippled through the cabin. Laptops opened, children fidgeted, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee began to drift from the galley. For most, it was an ordinary flight, nothing more than a 2-hour stretch between Phoenix and Denver. For it was a fragile test of control. She kept her eyes on the book in her lap, though she hadn't read a full paragraph since takeoff. The hum of the engines was both soothing and unnerving. Every vibration through the floor, every faint dip in altitude, brought flashes of memory, the familiar pulse of rotor blades, the roar of takeoff from dust-covered bases, the bark of radio voices calling coordinates into her headset. She shifted in her seat and took a slow breath. This is different, she reminded herself. This is safe. You're just a passenger now. The flight attendant appeared with a smile. "Can I get you something, miss?" Looked up, "Just black coffee, please." The attendant nodded, scribbling the order. "Beautiful day to fly," she said, cheerful as ever. Managed a polite nod, though she didn't entirely agree. Flying, for her, had never been about beauty. It was survival, calculation, and precision. Yet she didn't say that. She never did. The teenage boy beside her chuckled suddenly, earbuds in, lost in whatever show played on his phone. His carefree laughter drew a small smile from. She remembered being that young once, 19, maybe 20, sitting in a briefing room full of men who doubted her and proving every one of them wrong. Back then, flying wasn't just a job, it was a statement. She had belonged to the sky. Now she belonged to no one. The coffee arrived, steaming in a paper cup, wrapped her hands around it, grateful for the warmth. The woman on her right leaned over slightly. "You okay, dear? You look a bit pale." Blinked and smiled faintly. "Just not a big fan of flying anymore." "Can't blame you," the woman said, settling back. "I say a prayer every time the wheels leave the ground." Almost laughed, not unkindly but with quiet irony. If only you knew, she thought. She, once flown through sandstorms and gunfire, navigated blackouts, and landed under fire with a wounded crew. This smooth, steady flight at 30,000 feet should have been nothing. And yet her chest tightened with every subtle shift of the plane. Outside, the sunlight glinted on the wing. She let her gaze drift beyond it, to the layers of clouds painted pink by the late afternoon light. For a moment, they reminded her of the view from her Apache, that rare calm that came between missions. She could almost hear her old co-pilot's voice teasing her. "You always look at the clouds like they're gonna talk back." She laughed then. "Maybe they do, you're just not listening right." The memory faded as the captain's voice came through the intercom, calm, friendly. "Good afternoon, folks. This is your captain speaking. We're currently cruising at 33,000 feet with clear skies ahead and a tailwind that should get us into Denver about 10 minutes early. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." The passengers applauded softly, some joking about buying a lottery ticket for good luck, smiled faintly and closed her eyes, letting the voice wash over her. It was strange how a few words from the cockpit could still command her attention. When she'd been a captain, her voice had carried that same tone, measured, confident, and steady, no matter how bad the situation got. The kind of tone that made others believe they'd survive. She wondered if this captain felt that same responsibility now, the invisible weight of souls in his hands. Her coffee had gone cold by the time she realized she'd been staring at the in front of her for minutes. She shook her head and tried to refocus. Routine. This was supposed to be routine. Around her, people laughed, talked, read magazines. The world seemed normal. But inside there was a low, persistent hum, like a distant alarm she couldn't quite turn off. Then the plane jolted slightly. A quick bump. Nothing serious, just a pocket of turbulence. Passengers murmured softly, then went back to their conversations. Didn't flinch. She'd experienced worse, much worse. But something about the sound of the engines felt off, a slight unevenness, a faint shift in pitch. Probably nothing, she told herself. Still, she found her hand tightening around the armrest, the old reflexes whispering back to life. The boy next to her glanced up. "Whoa, you think that was bad turbulence?" Forced a smile. "Just a bump, happens all the time." But even as she said it, her eyes flicked toward the cockpit door. The faint light above it blinked green, steady and calm. She wanted to believe it meant everything was fine. The intercom crackled once, a quick burst of static, then silence. Tried to shake it off, sinking back into her seat. Maybe she was just overthinking. Maybe her mind was still trapped in the past, finding danger where there wasn't any. And yet, deep down, she couldn't ignore the old instinct rising quietly within her. The same instinct that had saved her life more times than she could count. Something in the air had changed. And before this flight was over, that change would turn the shy passenger in 14B into someone the world would never forget. The flight had settled into that strange middle stretch of calm that always follows takeoff. An hour of quiet conversation, laptop screens glowing, and the steady hum of engines that lulled everyone into believing nothing could possibly go wrong. The sun was lowering toward the horizon, painting the clouds with orange fire. In 14B, turned another unread page of her book and tried not to think about the war. She had begun to relax finally. Her heartbeat had slowed, the vibrations of the plane fading into background noise. The woman beside her was telling the boy on the other side about her in Colorado Springs. Somewhere near the back, a toddler was singing off-key to a nursery rhyme on a tablet. It felt safe, routine. Then the intercom clicked, a short burst of static, then silence. Looked up, her pulse ticking faster. She waited for the usual friendly voice. "Ladies, and this is your captain," but nothing came, just a faint hiss. The passengers barely noticed. The woman beside her chuckled softly, muttering something about the sound system, smiled politely, but her eyes stayed fixed on that speaker above the aisle. The hiss stopped, then came a voice strained and uncertain. Ladies, and this is your captain speaking." Something in his tone was wrong. Every pilot learns to hear fear, could sense it instantly. The pause between words, the tightness in his breathing, it wasn't the voice of someone giving a weather update. "We, have a small situation up here," he continued. "If there is any Apache pilot, repeat, any Apache helicopter pilot or someone with aviation or military flight experience, please press your call button and make yourself known to the crew immediately." The entire cabin froze. For a heartbeat no one moved, then whispers began. "Did he say Apache? Like the helicopter? What's happening?" Felt her stomach drop. Apache. That word was like a siren from another life. She blinked, trying to process it. The odds were astronomical. What were the chances that on this random flight that specific word would be called out? The teenage boy beside her grinned nervously. "That's wild. I bet it's just a drill or something." Didn't answer. Her throat had gone dry. She could feel the faint tremor in her hands as she clasped them together in her lap. No, she thought, this can't be happening. The voice returned, sharper now, more urgent. "If anyone has piloting experience, especially military, please identify yourself immediately." A woman gasped somewhere near the front. A man called for a flight attendant. The soft hum of normalcy shattered, replaced by the low murmur of worry. Straining flared awake like a switch had been thrown. Her mind began analyzing automatically, tone of voice, timing, lack of detail. He hadn't said what the problem was. That was bad. If it had been turbulence or a technical glitch, he would have said so. The deliberate vagueness screamed emergency. She looked down at her hands, steady now, despite the adrenaline crawling through her veins. For years, she'd promised herself she would never step near a cockpit again. But as the seconds dragged on and no one pressed a call button, the silence grew heavier. Then another announcement crackled through. "This is the first officer speaking. We could really use assistance up front. If anyone has flight experience, please." The second voice broke slightly on the last word, panic thinly disguised. A child began crying in row 17. Someone stood to retrieve a bag from the overhead bin, only to be told to sit down. The cabin crew moved quickly, faces pale but professional. One of them passed row, scanning the passengers. Her instinct screamed to rise, but fear, sharp and cold, held her down. What if I've forgotten? What if I can't help? What if I make it worse? She had walked away from that life for a reason. Too many memories, too many ghosts. Yet she could almost hear her old instructor again. A real pilot doesn't get to pick the moment. The sky picks it for you. His eyes flicked to the overhead panel. The light had turned back on. Outside the window, the plane seemed to dip ever so slightly. A faint vibration rippled through the cabin, subtle, but unmistakable to someone who had spent years feeling every movement of an aircraft. Her chest tightened. Something was wrong. The attendant came back down the aisle, voice tight but calm. "If anyone heard the captain's announcement and can assist, please signal now." His hand twitched upward, then froze halfway. Around her, no one moved. The silence was suffocating. Her heart thudded once, twice. She could almost feel the weight of the collective fear pressing against her back. Then she whispered to herself, so quietly the others couldn't hear, "You can't ignore the sky forever." Slowly she unbuckled her. The metallic click was louder than she expected. The woman beside her turned in surprise, eyes wide. "Are you?" Gave a small, steady nod. "I think they're looking for me." She stood up, shoulders squared, the calm of command returning like a long-lost friend. The aisle stretched before her like a runway, narrow and uncertain. As she began walking toward the front, heads turned, whispers followed, and the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. Whatever waited beyond that cockpit door knew one thing for sure. Her past had just caught up with her at 33,000 feet. The aisle felt longer than any runway had ever walked. Every step carried 100 memories, the metallic clang of helicopter doors, the echo of shouted coordinates, the smell of burning fuel. But here, in the tight corridor of Flight 237, there were no radios or co-pilots. Just dozens of faces turned toward her, frightened and hopeful, as if she were already their answer. A flight attendant met her halfway, eyes wide, voice trembling. "Ma'am, are you heard the announcement?" Nodded once. "I flew Apache for the U.S. Army." The attendant's relief was visible, her shoulders dropping. "Thank God, please come with me." As followed, she felt every passenger's gaze like a physical weight. Someone whispered, "She's a pilot." Another murmured a prayer. The teenage boy from 14A gave her a small, uncertain thumbs up. She tried to smile back, but her stomach was twisting. The curtain to first class parted, and suddenly the world became narrower, quieter. The flight attendant led her to the locked cockpit door, rapping twice with the back of her knuckle. "It's her, the pilot," she called. There was a pause, then the electronic click of the door unlocking. Stepped inside. The air in the cockpit was hot and sharp with adrenaline. The first officer, a young man barely 30, sat in the left seat, sweat glistening on his temples. The captain slumped beside him, his uniform collar open, face pale. One of the attendants crouched near the captain, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead. The first officer turned, eyes wild. He collapsed mid-descent. "Check. I'm managing, but..." He gestured helplessly at the instruments. "It's just me up here." Scanned the panels instinctively. Different aircraft, different systems, but the language of flight was universal: attitude, altitude, thrust, trim. Numbers, lights, rhythm. The heartbeat of a machine she understood better than her own. "Okay," she said quietly, voice low but firm. "Take a breath, tell me what's working." He blinked at her, caught between disbelief and relief. Autopilot's holding, but we had a short dip, probably a sensor glitch. I've radioed Denver for priority landing. We're still 30 minutes out. Good, she said. Keep her steady, I'll monitor. As she slipped into the right-hand seat, her hands found the edges of the control yoke. Her pulse steadied. The fear that had clung to her for years loosened its grip, replaced by the crisp clarity that always came with command. Behind her, the attendant whispered, "Do you need anything?" "Close the door," said softly, "and tell the crew to keep the passengers calm. No more announcements unless we say so." The door shut with a quiet hiss. The cockpit was now a capsule of tension, filled with the muted drone of engines and the rhythmic click of switches. Glanced at the captain, still breathing, shallow but steady. A medic's bag had been fetched from the galley. Someone was administering oxygen. The first officer's hand shook slightly on the throttle. "You've got this," she told him. "You've been trained for it." He swallowed hard. "Not for this." "You'd be surprised what you're ready for," she said. Her own words echoed in her mind, mocking and true. She hadn't believed she'd ever be ready again. Yet here she was, thousands of feet above the earth, guiding another pilot through a crisis. Outside the windshield, dusk was gathering, the horizon glowing red and violet. She checked the instruments again, speaking with crisp precision. "Speed 280, altimeter set, adjust heading 5 degrees east." The first officer almost automatically, his breathing slowing to match hers. Minutes passed. The autopilot hummed steady, watched the gauges, but her thoughts flickered back to the cabin, the anxious passengers, the murmured prayers. She wondered if anyone recognized how quickly a situation could unravel up here. One wrong decision, one delayed action, and routine could become tragedy. And then she thought of her own delayed actions, the hesitation before standing up, the years she'd spent running from the things she loved most. Maybe this was the moment that was always waiting for her, a second chance to do what she was made to do. The first officer glanced at her. "You really flew Apache?" She nodded. "Yes, different bird, same sky." He smiled faintly, nerves easing. "Then I'm glad you're here." "So am I," she said, and meant it. The intercom chimed softly, the flight attendant's voice filtered through. "Cockpit, this is cabin. Passengers are calm, everyone seated." "Copy," replied. "Tell them everything's under control." It wasn't, not entirely, but for the first time in years felt something that almost matched peace, purpose. Outside, the sky deepened into night, stars winking faintly through thin clouds. Inside, two pilots, one seasoned by war, one untested by fear, guided the plane forward together. And somewhere deep within her, realized that the sky she had once tried so hard to forget had just become her salvation again. The cockpit lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, reflecting off the glass panels that surrounded them like the inside of a living machine. The hum of the engines was steady now, but could feel the tension beneath it, the subtle, irregular tremor that every experienced pilot senses before something gives way. The first officer, Jacob Reed, was holding the controls too tight. His shoulders were locked, his jaw rigid. He'd steadied since she'd arrived, but fear still pulsed beneath every movement. Recognized that look. She'd seen it on rookie pilots in combat, men and women who had to pretend they weren't terrified while the world burned outside the windshield. "Take your hands off for a second," she said calmly. Jacob hesitated. "Ma'am, I—" "Do it," she said, her voice steady but firm. He released the yoke and took over, her grip precise, confident. The aircraft responded instantly, as if it recognized her. For the first time since she'd stepped on the plane, she felt like herself again. "Good," she murmured, adjusting the trim and checking the attitude indicator. "See, she just needs someone to talk to her." Jacob exhaled shakily, glancing at her profile. "You sound like you've done this before." "Thousands of hours," she replied softly, "but not in one of these." He smiled nervously. "Apache, right?" She nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Yeah, flying one of those was like wrestling lightning. You never really tame it, you just dance with it long enough to make it obey. Jacob let out a short, breathless laugh, the tension easing a fraction. Well, let's hope this one likes to dance. Outside, darkness was falling fast. The sky had turned a deep indigo, the last strips of sunlight fading behind distant clouds. Glanced at the radar, storm cells were beginning to form along their route. The cabin below was calm for now, but the atmosphere outside the cockpit was shifting. She pressed the comm switch. Denver Center, this is Flight 237, Captain incapacitated, First Officer and Assisting Pilot in control. A crackle of static answered, then a voice. Copy, 237. Confirm assisting pilot credentials. Hesitated, then replied. Former U.S. Army Captain, A-64 Apache. Logging in as temporary support until medical emergency is resolved. There was a pause, surprise on the other end. Then, Roger that, Captain. We'll coordinate your descent. You're cleared for priority landing when ready. Jacob looked over. They called you Captain. She smiled faintly. Old habits die hard. The cockpit door buzzed softly. A flight attendant's voice came through. Captain, the passengers are asking if we're safe. Exchanged a quick glance with Jacob. Tell them yes, she said. Tell them their pilot's still flying, just with a little backup tonight. The attendant's voice softened. Thank you. When the door clicked shut again, Jacob muttered, You're a lot calmer than I'd be. Adjusted a dial. That's not calm, that's focus. A low vibration rippled through the floor. Both pilots froze. The instrument panel blinked once, a flicker of yellow warning lights. Leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Hydraulics are fine, engines are fine, she scanned the display. What the hell? Jacob spotted it first. Autopilot disengaged. Reacted instantly, taking manual control. The plane dipped, not violently, but enough to jolt the passengers awake. She steadied it, heart pounding but hands perfectly still. Denver Center, Flight 237, she called. We've lost autopilot control. Manual override engaged. Stabilizing altitude. Copy that, 237. You are cleared for emergency approach at your discretion. Maintain heading and advise. Roger, she said, then turning to Jacob, we'll hand fly it, stay with me. He nodded, sweat glistening on his temple. Yes, ma'am. The air outside thickened. The faint glow of lightning rippled through distant clouds, illuminating their path. Jaw tightened. It wasn't the first time she'd flown into a storm, but it was the first time she'd done it with 180 lives behind her instead of 2. For a moment she felt the weight of that, the enormity of responsibility, the old familiar fear, not of dying but of failing others. Then she pushed it aside. Flaps 10, bring her down 2,000 feet per minute. Jacob obeyed. Aye, Captain. The word captain hit her harder than she expected. It had been years since anyone called her that. And somehow, hearing it now, in this narrow space, at 30,000 feet, in a crisis she never asked for, made something deep inside her stir. The plane steadied again. Outside, the sky flashed white with distant thunder. Jacob turned to her. You're really not scared, are you? Kept her eyes on the horizon. Everyone's scared, she said. The trick is flying anyway. He nodded slowly, as if memorizing it. The intercom buzzed softly, another voice from the cabin. Captain, the passengers are asking if they should prepare for anything. Hesitated, then pressed the button. Her voice, when it came, was calm, controlled, and strong, the voice of someone born to lead from the sky. Ladies, and this is speaking. I'm a pilot assisting your crew tonight. Everything is under control. You may feel some movement as we adjust for landing, but I promise we're bringing you home safely. A pause. Then applause erupted faintly through the intercom, scattered but genuine. Jacob smiled, eyes bright. You really are the captain. adjusted the heading one last time. "For tonight," she said, eyes on the storm ahead, "I guess I am." The sky outside had turned into a living thing. Lightning flashed across the dark clouds like veins of fire, illuminating the wings of Flight 237 in split-second bursts of white. The passengers below could feel the plane shudder with each gust, though they didn't know the full truth that the autopilot was gone, and every inch of altitude now rested in two pairs of human hands. Sat tall in the right-hand seat, her fingers steady on the yoke. Every sense she had was awake: the rumble of the engines, the hiss of static through the headset, the faint tremor in the floor. Beside her, First Officer Jacob Reed was reading out the descent checklist, his voice tight but controlled. "Landing lights on, spoilers armed, altimeter set." "Good," said, eyes locked on the altimeter. "Bring her down slow. Let's not fight the wind, let it guide us." Jacob nodded, glancing nervously at the windshield. The storm clouds ahead were thickening, dark walls moving like living shadows. "Denver Center, this is Flight 237, beginning descent to 10,000, radioed. The reply came through, distorted by static. "Copy that, 237. Winds out of the northwest at 40 knots. Heavy turbulence reported below 15,000. "Of course there is," muttered. Jacob gave a nervous laugh. "Could be worse." "It could always be worse," she replied with a half-smile. "Let's keep it that way." A sudden jolt rattled the cabin. The plane dipped, lightning flashing close enough to paint the cockpit in ghostly blue light. Jacob flinched, gripping the yoke too tight. "Ease off," barked. "Don't fight it counter, don't clamp down." He loosened his grip. The plane steadied slightly. "Good," she said. "Remember, she's not your enemy, she's scared too." Jacob shot her a quick look. "Do you always talk to planes like that?" "Only the ones that listen," said. For a moment they both smiled, a brief flicker of humanity in the storm. Then through the windshield the city lights appeared far below, a glowing patch of gold through the shifting gray. Denver, home, safety. His chest tightened. They were close, too close to fail now. "Okay," she said, voice shifting back to command. "Flaps 15, reduce speed to 220. "Flaps 15, speed 220, Jacob confirmed, fingers moving across the panel. The aircraft responded sluggishly, slower than normal, frowned. "She's heavy. Must be the air pressure. Keep an eye on the vertical speed, don't let it run away." As they descended, turbulence struck again, harder this time. The plane lurched violently to the left. Passengers screamed below, trays rattled, luggage shifted. Jacob shouted, "She's rolling." "I've got it," his voice cut through the chaos. She gripped the yoke, countered the roll with precise, practiced movements. The plane steadied, but sweat beaded on her forehead. Jacob exhaled shakily. "That was close," she said, eyes sharp, "but not the worst I've seen." He gave her a sidelong look. "You must flown through hell." She didn't answer right away. The memories came unbidden: the Afghan desert, tracer rounds lighting up the night, a co-pilot's voice fatting over radio static. She swallowed hard. "Something like that," she said quietly. Below them, lightning struck again, closer now, followed by a deafening clap of thunder. The aircraft jolted, instruments flickering. Jacob cursed under his breath. "We just lost nav assist." Reacted instantly. Switched to manual bearings, compass heading 085. He, sweat dripping down his temple, confirmed. The storm was now all around them, a churning wall of light and noise. The city was a faint glow through sheets of rain, every second stretched, elastic and endless. In the cabin, passengers clung to armrests, some whispering prayers. The teenage boy from 14A was crying quietly, while the elderly woman beside him gripped his hand. The flight attendants held on to the galley rails, trying to smile through their fear. And in the cockpit, two pilots held the sky together. His voice was calm, rhythmic. "Speed 190, flaps 20, start final descent." Jacob nodded, his breathing steady now, synced with hers. Flaps 20, descent initiated. Outside, the storm began to break. The lightning moved off to the east, leaving behind a curtain of rain that shimmered against the landing lights. Denver Center Flight 237 called, on final approach, requesting emergency priority clearance. Cleared for runway 26 left, came the reply. Ground team standing by. Glanced at Jacob. This is it, you ready? He managed a grin. With you, yeah. She looked ahead. The runway lights were faint but visible, twin lines of white cutting through the rain. It was beautiful, almost surreal. 10 minutes, she said softly, half to herself. 10 minutes of forever. And as they descended through the final layers of storm, felt something she hadn't in years, not just the thrill of flying, but the fragile, sacred weight of being alive to do it. Rain hammered against the windshield like 1,000 tiny bullets. The runway lights flickered through the downpour, stretching into two thin lines of white that wavered in the storm. His pulse matched the rhythmic vibration of the engines, steady, focused, alive. Altitude 5,000 and dropping, Jacob Reed reported, his voice taut but clear. Good, said. Flaps 25, speed 175. Flaps 25, speed 175. The shuddered, its metal frame groaning against the gusts. Each movement of the yoke demanded every ounce of strength had. She could feel the turbulence like fists pushing against the wings, the storm trying to pull them apart. Denver Tower, Flight 237, she radioed. On final approach, runway 26 left. Request emergency response on standby. The tower's voice crackled back. Affirmative, 237. Winds 40 knots cross, visibility 0.8 miles. You're clear to land. His jaw tightened. Copy that. Jacob swallowed. Crosswinds that strong. I know, she interrupted. We'll crab in flare just before touchdown. Follow my lead. Outside, lightning flashed again, slicing across the dark. The entire cockpit glowed blue for a heartbeat, and in that instant saw her reflection in the glass, older, worn but unbroken. The soldier in her had never left. 2,000 feet, Jacob said. Speed 165. His hands tightened on the yoke. Her knuckles whitened, but her movement stayed precise. Okay, time to earn our wings. The turbulence hit again, harder this time. The plane lurched right, alarms shrieking briefly before corrected. The passengers screamed. The cabin lights flickered, but in the cockpit, her voice cut through it all like steel. Focus, she barked. Keep your eyes on the horizon. Don't chase the instruments, feel the plane. Jacob forced a breath, steadying his trembling hands. I've got her. Together, said. He nodded. Together. The runway was visible now, shimmering through sheets of rain. Red lights blinked at the far end. Fire trucks, ambulances, emergency crews waiting like silent witnesses. Gear down, commanded. Jacob reached for the lever. Gear down. The heavy thud of the landing gear lowering echoed through the cockpit. The airspeed dropped. The engines whined in resistance. His heart thumped in rhythm with every instrument blink. 500 feet, Jacob said, his voice rising slightly. Hold her steady, murmured. Come on, sweetheart, stay with me. The plane dipped again too fast. Alarm screamed, sink rate, sink rate. Jacob's panic broke through. We're coming in too hot. Throttle up now, shouted. The engines roared, lifting them just enough to clear the trees at the runway's edge. The wheels scraped through rain, the plane leveling out just above the tarmac. His mind went silent. Training took over. There was no storm, no fear, no memory. Just wind, metal, motion, and the delicate thread between disaster and salvation. Now, she whispered. She flared the nose. The wheels touched down once, hard, bouncing, then again, smoother, kissing the wet runway with a hiss of steam. Speed brakes. Jacob pulled the lever. The flaps deployed, engines howling in reverse thrust. The plane vibrated violently, tires screeching through puddles. The runway lights blurred past in streaks of yellow and white. "Reverse full," called. "Reverse full," Jacob echoed. The plane slowed, 140 knots, 12090. Finally, the roar began to fade. The vibration eased. The aircraft rolled to a trembling stop halfway down the runway, rain still beating against the fuselage like applause from the heavens. For a moment, no one moved. The cockpit was filled only with the sound of the engines winding down and the heavy breathing of two people who had just carried a miracle. Then Jacob laughed, a shaky, unbelieving sound. "We did it." Didn't answer right away. Her hands were still on the controls, knuckles white. She slowly exhaled and leaned back, letting the reality sink in. "We did," she said softly. "We really did." Her headset crackled. "Flight 237, emergency services on approach. Please confirm all safe." Smiled faintly, glancing at Jacob. "Tell them," she said. He pressed the mic. "All souls safe, Denver, we're home." Applause erupted from the cabin, faint at first, then thunderous. Even through the sealed cockpit door they could hear it. People crying, cheering, laughing. Life pouring out after fear. Jacob turned to her, eyes shining. "You're incredible." Looked out the rain-streaked windshield at the blinking runway lights, the paramedics rushing forward, and the first hint of dawn breaking through the clouds. "No," she said quietly, "just doing what I should never stop doing." The storm had finally passed, but her heart was still flying, higher than it had in years. The rain had stopped by dawn. The storm clouds that had raged through the night were now only gray ghosts drifting away across the Denver skyline. The tarmac glistened under the pale morning light, puddles catching the reflection of blinking runway lamps. Emergency trucks idled nearby, their flashing reds fading one by one as calm finally returned. Sat on the edge of an ambulance bumper, her flight uniform soaked through, hair plastered to her forehead. A medic was wrapping a light blanket around her shoulders, but she barely noticed. She was watching the sun rise through the clouds, orange and gold and alive. It had been hours since Flight 237 had landed, but everything still felt surreal. Passengers were being escorted into the terminal, some weeping, some silent, all trembling with gratitude and exhaustion. A few turned to look back toward the aircraft, toward the woman who had walked up from seat 14B and turned fear into hope. She saw the teenage boy from 14A, the one who'd given her the shy thumbs up before everything began. He was standing near his mother, waving. She smiled faintly and returned the gesture, her fingers trembling slightly. "Captain." She turned. A man in a dark uniform approached, the airline's operations director. His expression was part awe, part disbelief. "That landing," he said softly, "I don't think anyone here will ever forget it." Shook her head. "It wasn't just me. The first officer, Jacob Reed, he kept his head when it mattered most." Jacob, sitting a few feet away, looked up with a tired grin. "Only because you told me to." The director smiled at them both. "You two made aviation history tonight. We'll handle the paperwork later, but for now, thank you, from all of us." He moved off, leaving and Jacob in the quiet hum of the early morning. For a long moment, neither spoke. The adrenaline had finally begun to fade, leaving only the stillness that comes after survival. Could feel every heartbeat, every ache, every breath of relief. Jacob broke the silence first. "You ever think you'd fly again?" Stared down at her hands, the hands that had once gripped helicopter controls, then for years had done nothing more daring than hold a coffee cup. "No," she said truthfully. "I thought that part of me was gone." He tilted his head. "And now?" She looked up at the brightening sky. "Now, I think I finally remembered who I was." For the first time since she'd stepped onto that plane, she smiled, not the polite, distant kind she'd learned to wear over the years, but a real one, the kind that reached her eyes. Nearby, reporters were already gathering. Someone had recorded part of the landing announcement, Another had filmed her walking off the plane. Within hours, the story was spreading. Army veteran saves 184 lives on Flight 237. Cameras flashed, microphones reached out, questions flew through the air. "Captain, how did you stay calm? What went through your mind when you took control? Will you fly again?" She gave short, careful answers, enough for them to write their headlines. But when one young reporter asked, "What made you stand up when everyone else stayed seated?" she paused, her gaze distant. "I didn't stand up for recognition," she said softly. "I stood up because the sky doesn't care about fear. It just needs someone brave enough to take the controls." The reporter went silent. The answer didn't fit neatly into a quote box, but it was true. Later, when the crowd thinned, Jacob joined her again by the terminal window. They watched the plane being towed away, engines silent, its silver frame gleaming under the dawn. "You know," he said, "you could come back. The airlines would hire you in a second after this." Laughed quietly, "Maybe, or maybe I'll just start smaller, teach, help someone else find their wings." Jacob nodded. "Whatever you do, the sky's not done with you yet." She smiled, "Maybe not." Outside, a new day had fully arrived, the sun burning away the last traces of the storm. Stood, pulling the blanket around her shoulders, feeling the weight of exhaustion finally lift. She turned toward the window one last time. The clouds were clearing, revealing a stretch of endless blue. For years she had run from the sky, afraid of what it reminded her of: loss, war, failure. But now she saw it for what it truly was: freedom. The quiet voice inside her whispered the same words she'd once told Jacob in the storm. "Everyone's scared. The trick is flying anyway." And as she walked out into the rising light, her reflection shimmered faintly against the glass, not as the shy passenger from seat 14B, but as Captain, the woman who remembered, finally, how to soar.